In Burkina Faso, under the leadership of Ibrahim Traoré, something was stirring beneath the surface. Silent resistance, a spark that could set all of West Africa ablaze. The sands of Ouagadougou carried whispers of revolution, not just a political shift, but an African awakening. Across dusty roads and crowded markets, men in dark suits and polished boots spoke in coded language, their voices laced with fear. They knew something powerful was coming. A figure had emerged, a revolutionary leader who challenged more than regimes. He confronted neocolonialism itself. This was not just politics. This was a fight against foreign influence, against the invisible hands that had steered African politics for decades. In clandestine meetings in neighboring capitals, three nations, once confident in their control, conspired to halt the rising force from Burkina Faso. They underestimated one thing: the unbreakable spirit of youth in power. They underestimated Ibrahim Traoré. Under the heavy skies of West Africa, military leadership was being quietly redefined. It was no longer about hierarchy or foreign allegiance. It was about African unity. It was about Africa's future. As intelligence networks buzzed with activity and diplomats exchanged veiled threats, the streets of Ouagadougou remained deceptively calm. But in the heart of it all, Traoré was preparing. Calm down, calculated, ready. This would be a day the world would not forget. The day one man would face three nations and reshape the truth about Africa. Inside the Grand Palais Hotel of Ouagadougou, where power brokers and foreign emissaries mingled under the guise of diplomacy, Ibrahim Traoré arrived unaccompanied. No military entourage, no medals or ceremonial uniform, just a simple, sharp-cut civilian suit and steady gauze. To many in the room, he was unrecognizable, deliberately so. In a corner, a French businessman, tall and smug, flanked by two West African commissioners loyal to foreign interests, spotted Traoré. Without realizing who stood before him, the businessman approached with a dismissive smile. "Young man," he sneered, his accent thick with condescension, "this area is for dignitaries, not soldiers dreaming of revolutions." His hand casually patted Traoré's shoulder, a gesture soaked in arrogance. One of the commissioners chuckled, nodding approvingly. "Perhaps you should leave discussions of African independence to the men with real experience," he added, swirling his wineglass with mockery. The air grew heavy. Eyes from surrounding tables darted their way, intrigued by the rising tension. Traoré's expression didn't flicker. His calm silence contrasted sharply with the smug laughter around him. They spoke of military coups as if they were boardroom games, of Pan-Africanism as if it were a childish fantasy. None of them knew the man they were belittling was already reshaping African politics under their noses. They didn't see the undercurrent of the African Revolution rising beneath the still waters of that evening. Across the hall, one of Traoré's trusted aides in plain clothes subtly observed the interaction, signaling discreetly into a concealed earpiece. The time was drawing near. This moment, this insult, would be the final grain of sand before the desert storm. The grand doors of the palais creaked open, revealing a formation of elite soldiers from Burkina Faso's special forces. Faces stoic, uniforms immaculate, insignias glinting beneath the chandeliers. They marched in silent precision, cutting through the crowd like a blade. At the head of the formation walked Colonel Sanda, known throughout West Africa for his unwavering loyalty to Ibrahim Traoré. and the African Revolution. His eyes scanned the room, locking directly on the group surrounding Traoré. The French businessman's smile faltered. Murmurs spread across the hall. The two West African commissioners shifted uncomfortably. Colonel Sander approached with deliberate steps, stopping precisely at Traoré's side. Then, in a voice loud enough for the entire hall to hear, he saluted sharply. "President Ibrahim Traoré, sir. The delegation is secured. The operation against the coup attempt has been neutralized. Your orders?" Silence. A silence so thick it seemed to press against every chest in the room. The businessman's face drained of color, his glass slipping from his fingers, shattering on the floor. Across the hall, the foreign diplomats froze mid-step, their whispers strangled by disbelief. All eyes locked on the man they had dismissed. The man who now commanded the future of West Africa and embodied the spirit of African independence. The weight of anti-colonialism, of African unity, of the truth about Africa now sits in the quiet dignity of Ibrahim Traoré. Without breaking eye contact, Traoré simply nodded to Colonel Sander. "Proceed," he commanded softly. Behind the military formation, journalists rushed in, cameras flashing, recording the scene that would soon be broadcast to every corner of the continent. The face of the African awakening exposed in full clarity. As the revelation echoed, across West Africa, the immediate reaction was chaos. Among the three conspiring nations, intelligence cables burned with urgent communications. In the capitals of neighboring countries, each of which had quietly supported the coup attempt to destabilize Burkina Faso's new leadership. Foreign-backed operatives scrambled to salvage what little influence remained. For decades, foreign influence had dictated the trajectory of African politics, but today the script was being rewritten by youth in power. The balance had shifted irreversibly. In less than 24 hours, under Traoré's direct command, military leadership across Burkina Faso executing precise operations, border posts secured, foreign agents detained, leaked documents exposing neocolonialism strategies were broadcast across African media channels. Traoré didn't just defend his position. He flipped the narrative. He unveiled the intricate webs of external manipulation that had plagued Africa for generations, exposing the hidden puppeteers behind the scenes. The vision of Pan-Africanism, once dreamed of by past revolutionaries, was no longer abstract. It had a face. It had momentum. As images of Traoré standing firm against the attempted suppression circulated globally, a surge of pride rippled across the continent. Students, workers, soldiers, and elders rallied in support, waving flags of African unity, chanting slogans of African independence, declaring solidarity with Burkina Faso. The African Revolution was no longer confined within borders. It was contagious. The echoes of Africa rising could be felt from Dakar to Nairobi, from Lagos to Johannesburg. Traoré had not only faced three nations, he had won a moral victory for millions. In private chambers, the same businessmen, diplomats, and commissioners who had mocked him were now left scrambling, their calculated arrogance dissolved into uncertainty. They realized too late. This was no longer the Africa they could control. This was the era of the revolutionary leader, of an Africa's future shaped by its own sons and daughters. The following day, Ibrahim Traoré agreed to a public address. On the extravagant stage, on the grandiose display, Just a wooden podium, flanked by Burkina Faso's flag and a backdrop of calm, disciplined soldiers. His demeanor was unchanged, serene, unshaken, resolute. Before an assembly of national and international media, Traoré detailed, with clarity and dignity, the events that had unfolded. The external plots, the manipulation, the betrayal of African sovereignty. His voice, though calm, carried the weight of generations who had fought against neo-colonialism and longed for African independence. But there were no calls for revenge, no inflammatory rhetoric. Instead, Traoré spoke of justice, not the justice of retribution, but of restoration. Foreign operatives were detained, not executed. Complicit officials faced courts, not purges. He extended an open hand to neighboring nations, offering dialogue over division, insisting that African unity was the only way forward. "This is not just politics," he declared in closing, his voice firm. "This is a fight for the soul of our continent, a fight against the shadows of foreign influence, for the dawn of a truly independent Africa." The businessman and the two commissioners who had disrespected Traoré the night before were quietly escorted into custody. No public humiliation in the spectacle. Their downfall was marked not by shouts, but by silence, a silence louder than any verdict. The people saw not only a leader, but a man of high moral ground. Traoré's refusal to descend into vindictiveness reinforced his status as a revolutionary leader, someone driven by purpose, not ego. Across West Africa, the message was clear: true strength lay in dignity, and under Traoré's guidance, Burkina Faso had embodied it. The quiet justice of that day would reverberate far beyond its borders, inspiring a new generation to believe in an Africa rising, free from the chains of foreign influence and emboldened by its own truth. The impact of Ibrahim Traoré's stand reverberated far beyond the borders of Burkina Faso. From the bustling streets of West Africa to the distant coasts of the continent, the narrative spreads like wildfire. Social media platforms flooded with messages of support, hashtags celebrating African unity, African independence, and the end of foreign influence-dominated trends. Universities held forums to dissect the strategy and moral clarity of Traoré's leadership. His name, once whispered cautiously in political circles, became a symbol of defiance and hope. Across radio waves, television screens, and marketplaces, people echoed a single truth: Africa is rising. This is the awakening. In Dakar, a group of Pan-African youth unveiled a mural titled "The Revolution of Dignity," depicting Traoré alongside historical giants of anti-colonialism. In Nairobi, intellectuals debated the revival of Pan-Africanism, calling for a continent-wide dialogue on sovereignty and unity. In Johannesburg, union leaders cited Traoré's actions as a blueprint for grassroots empowerment. What had begun as a military coup d'etat transformed into a cultural and intellectual movement, one that reignited the vision of a self-reliant, united Africa. Diplomatic relations across the continent subtly shifted. Nations that once bowed to external pressures began exploring regional alliances and trade pacts free from neo-colonial strings. Cautious leaders of Traoré's rise now had to reckon with a growing demand from their own people for transparency, dignity, and independence. The African Revolution was no longer a distant ideal. It was unfolding in real time, led by a revolutionary leader who had shown what was possible. In quiet reflection, Traoré stood at his office balcony, overlooking the city he had defended. The chants from distant crowds echoed faintly, not in chaos, but in harmony. His gaze was calm, but his mission clear. This was just the beginning. Africa's future would no longer be dictated from abroad. It would be shaped by the hands of Africans themselves. Months after the historic confrontation, Burkina Faso had transformed into more than just a symbol. It had become a hub of African awakening. Under Ibrahim Traoré's military leadership, national institutions were revitalized. Young cadets, inspired by the ideals of youth in power, enrolled in newly established military and civic academies dedicated not only to defense, but also to ethics, leadership, and African unity. Scholarships and exchange programs flourished between African nations, strengthening bonds that once lay dormant. Where once there were walls of division, bridges of cooperation emerged. Traoré spearheaded the creation of the West African Sovereignty Forum, an alliance of nations committed to dismantling foreign influence and championing Pan-Africanism through shared economic, military, and cultural strategies. At its inaugural summit in Ouagadougou, he stood before leaders from Mali, Ghana, Senegal, and beyond, declaring, "We are not isolated nations anymore. We are one voice, one force. The days of neo-colonialism are over. The future belongs to those who dare to shape it." Applause thundered across the hall. The seeds of Africa's future were now firmly rooted in collaboration and dignity. Across the continent, a new generation of leaders emerged, many openly crediting Traoré's defiance as their catalyst. From local councils to parliaments, younger, more conscious voices echoed the mantra of African independence. The idea of a continent beholden to foreign powers became increasingly untenable. Slowly but surely, the long dream of African revolution, once crushed under the weight of external debt and manipulation, breathed anew. Yet despite the accolades and global attention, Traoré remained grounded. He understood the true revolution was not in speeches or parades, but in the sustained empowerment of his people. As he often repeated in private meetings, "Africa is rising. This is the awakening. This is Ibrahim Traoré's revolution." The legacy was no longer an idea, it was in motion. As twilight fell over Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré sat alone, penning a letter to the next generation. His hand moved steadily across the page, his words reflecting the journey of a continent rediscovering its soul. "We are the children of giants," he wrote. "We are the heirs of dreams once silenced by the weight of foreign chains, but no longer." His voice, heard through a reflective narration over images of bustling African cities and lush, rural landscapes, echoed a calm conviction. Africa is rising. This is the awakening. This is Ibrahim Traoré's revolution. The camera slowly panned across symbols of resilience, farmers tending their crops, engineers building railways, scholars debating ideas of African unity in open-air universities. The future he had defended was no longer abstract. It was tangible, concrete, alive. Across borders, hearts and minds had shifted. What began as a solitary stand against a coup attempt and foreign influence had blossomed into a continental movement redefining Africa's future. The final image returned to Traoré, standing atop a quiet hill overlooking his homeland. No fanfare, On the grand parade, just a man and his unwavering commitment to the dignity of his people. As the wind carried the distant chants of unity, the narrator's voice delivered the closing words. This was never just about one man. It was about all of us, about an Africa awakening from centuries of silence. And now we move forward, together, unshaken, unbroken, and truly free. Fade out. The screen lingers on 4 final words in bold text. Africa is rising.